Just want to make sure that it's recording. Yes. Okay, now it is. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our panel, The Role of Open Source in SD-WAN. My name is Amir Zmora, and with me today is Sammy Chang, who is Product Manager at Advantech, and Joachim Palm, who is Product Manager at TeliaCarrier. And maybe we'll start with a quick round of introductions, and from there we'll move over to the panel. So Sammy, do you want to be first?
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to virtually be here with you all today. I am the Product Manager in Advantech Cloud IoT Group. At Advantech, we have been working in network and communications industry for a number of years. And now we are part of the network function virtualization revolution with a wide range of SD-WAN and UCP white box appliances that help customers to build the foundation to open the network infra.
Thank you, Sammy. And Joachim?
Thank you for letting me join in on this panel. I'm Joachim Palm. I'm Product Manager at TeliaCarrier. Those who know of us, know that we are the #1 backbone on the internet, which essentially means that we have the most routes. Over 70% of the internet always passes through our network. My responsibility on TeliaCarrier is to develop the enterprise product portfolio, which is our freshly started endeavor. Wherein I have founded products such as the TeliaCarrier On-Prem, which is our service platform, the MPLS product, Smart IP VPN, the DIA for internet connectivity, and also the SD-WAN product that we currently use.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So regarding myself, again, my name is Amir Zmora. I'm CEO and co-founder of FlexiWAN. And FlexiWAN is the world's first open source SD-WAN. We disrupt the open source market with our 3 world firsts of, first of all, being the first open source, second, being the first company to provide an SD-WAN application store, and third, by providing a SaaS model as the business model for SD-WAN for our product. So before we jump into questions, and we'll also have time for the audience to ask some questions, I want to start with just a few slides as an introduction to talk about open source in general and how or what elements are available today in order to build an SD-WAN solution with open source components. So we'll start by talking about the evolution of open source. And this is not specifically about SD-WAN or even not specifically about networking. It's general. And the beginning of open source was actually some kind of unaffiliated communities, or I would say, a few people in a garage starting to build some products as open source, not always with the business model behind it, but many times with the vision and a belief in having an open world. I think that Linux is a great example of such initiatives. And we also have databases and other components in that space. The second generation of open source was actually companies that developed open source. Many, many times, these were elements that were developed by very big companies, and they were technology elements that are used in their products, and the community adopted them and added more capabilities to them. You can see databases as a great example. So these are not full products, but technology elements, some of them with a commercial business model, some of them without. And usually when the company wanted to monetize it, the way to do it was actually to provide a free option with no support, or a commercial license where you can actually have more flexibility in adding things without sharing them with the community, or getting support, or just getting a hardened solution. I think that Red Hat is a great example of such a case. The third generation, which we see a lot of it today, is companies that fully focus on developing the open source product and then launching SaaS services based on that. So on one hand, the community can take the product and use it and do whatever they want with it based on the license of that product, or it's used as a SaaS solution that companies can take and use as if it's a commercial product, but it's based on the open source. So they can see the code and people can see the all of the security risks and so forth and provide either developments or QA or bug fixes. Now, this is not something that I invented. Actually, these three generations are mentioned in an article written by Mike Volpe, who is a venture partner at Index and was previously Chief Strategy Officer at Cisco. I highly recommend reading. There's a link here in the presentation. I highly recommend reading this article. I think it's a very good one. It goes way beyond what I just explained here. So with this, I want to get more into networking and SD-WAN. So when we look at the way SD-WANs are structured, we see here in this box over here, the various elements and layers that you would see in an SD-WAN solution, where you have the edge device over here with the router and the controller on top of it. And then you have the central management. These together, these three elements together, combine the SD-WAN solution. And on top of that, we have an orchestrator. And the orchestrator is typically used by service providers that many of them are actually using multiple SD-WAN solutions, multiple SD-WAN vendors. And for that, they're using an orchestrator in order to be able to manage all of these SD-WAN solutions that they're using in their network. This is, of course, a general presentation. It doesn't mean that everybody is exactly working according to this. Now, if we look inside these layers, specifically the SD-WAN part, let's see some building blocks that are available there. So starting on the edge device side, we have a lot of options on the OS and the virtualization space. As you can see, all these logos over here. And these are used by, I would say, most, if not all, of the SD-WAN vendors. I don't see too many today starting to develop their own operating system or Linux. Maybe they do some changes, but they don't develop everything from scratch. On top of that, we have the packet processing. We see here very commonly used elements, DPDK, that many are using in order to improve performance, and the FDIO or VPP open source, which is also used by many of the companies. On top of that, we have all the technologies, or what I call them as applications, that provide more uniqueness on the edge device side. And this starts with encryption and tunnel management, creation and management, and all the architecture of the network, and then more advanced capabilities like the WAN optimization or DPI, or security elements that can be added there. There are some open source elements here, like this example that I'm giving here. There are some firewall open source elements, but generally speaking, in the SD-WAN solutions that we see today on the market, most of these elements or the capabilities in this layer are developed by the company. On top of that, we have the controller. This is the logo of the FRR, which is used by many of the SD-WAN vendors, but for all the routing protocols and so forth. And then you have the APIs and the interface to the central management. Moving to the other side, which is the central management. Here, the major part that we see open source elements being used by the vendors are on the infrastructure side, okay, like the Node.js and the databases and the other elements like Ansible and Kubernetes and so forth. On top of that, we have a lot of proprietary, and that's the major part of the management, and all the logic is proprietary and developed by each one of the vendors, and very hard to find an open source element that you actually can take and use inside over here. On top of that, we have the orchestration layer, which I mentioned before. We do have some open source elements over there that are used by many of the service providers or vendors. So to summarize all of that, if we look again at the elements that we see here for SD-WAN, we can see that there is good coverage on the infrastructure level. There are gaps that we see and very limited coverage on the more specific logic and the controller side of the edge device. Central management, it's only in the very basic elements like databases and so forth. And there is nice coverage also in the orchestration. So these are the major gaps that we see today for actually having an SD-WAN solution built of various open source elements. What we have done at FlexiWAN, we just decided that we're going to close this by providing a complete solution that is available as open source. So with that, I will stop my screen share, the presentation, and we'll move over to the panel. And maybe the first question that we'll ask is the strategy of your companies when it comes to open source. And you don't need to limit yourself only to SD-WAN. You can talk about this in a more general perspective of your view of open source, some activities that you do, or your beliefs in this space. So who wants to go first? So Joachim, Sammy went first before, so I think it's your turn. Please do.
Break the silence. So, yeah, when it comes to open source programs in general, when you take it from a company Telia Carrier point of view, it's we aim to shoot for the program or application that best suits our needs, whether it be open source or it be a closed up vendor locked in program or application. And when it comes to more specifically my point of view, when it comes to open source solutions, I tend to lean towards them. Mainly, maybe we'll get into that later, but mainly because I think that the community support behind open source solution brings a whole lot to the table.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe we'll actually talk about this a little bit more, and also about, there are some people who claim, well, let's say it like that. There are different approaches or point of views with regards to security of the product in general when you relate to open source. So I'll be very happy to hear your point of view, but let's leave it actually for a follow-up question after Sammy goes. So Sammy, please.
Okay, I think open source allows the flexibility for customers to build up their need with the possibility to extend what they want to do in the future without any limit by other suppliers. So I think that is why the open source became a really hot topic from enterprise edge to telco edge.
Okay, so do you want, Sammy or Joachim, do you want to relate also to the point of views that we see today in the market? I think that there was also a change along the years of the stability of open source, the security of open source elements versus closed products. What's your point of view on that? You can continue, Sammy, if you want, or you can move it over.
I think maybe Joachim can be the first.
Okay. I'll pick it up. When it comes to both stability and security, actually, it depends on how long the open source solution has been in the market. I mean, look at the open source OSs, for example.
Yeah.
The community support there has actually made these kind of OSs more robust and more secure and more usable in more commercial environment than the closed up OSs that exists on the market today, which basically means that the community support adding more eyes to the problem and to the subject and more brains to the problem and the subject actually is a positive thing, because then you can make your own kind of box out of it, and you can also use that experience in making that box available to someone else so they can expand and build on it and maybe find some holes in your box, assist you in fixing them. You can look at their project, see what they've been doing, implement some of that functionality into your own, and so forth. So it's a continued high development with open source that doesn't exist with closed sourced program hardware.
Yeah, I actually fully agree. I think that in the past, people were afraid of using open source, mainly on the higher layers, not on the OS level. I worked some years ago for a company that we sold protocol stacks, and we always had competition with open source. That was many years ago. That was in the 90s, end of the 90s and beginning of 2000. I'm revealing my age here. And later on, when WebRTC, for example, came out, You saw some R&D people who kind of, say, it's not a good product yet and so forth. But very quickly, it advanced. So of course, you had the Google force behind it, so they could throw tens of people on it. But also the community contributed a lot of things, and the usage became massive. And it's used today in many, many products. Sammy, do you want to comment something, or should I ask another question?
I think you can just follow the other questions.
Okay,
yeah.
So I want to go a little bit more into SD-WAN now, with your permission, and ask you, what is the evolution that you've seen since the first deployments of SD-WAN and the market drivers that you see today for open source SD-WAN solutions? Maybe Sam, if you can start.
Okay, I think the service providers start to disaggregate hardware as the first step to open the SD-WAN solution. And nowadays, they have learned how they can get benefit from this kind of a disaggregate model. But of course, they have to solve some potential issues on this kind of disaggregate model. So I think after some successful proof of concept in the past few years, I think from our point of view, I think the service provider, they start to think about the software disaggregation in order to build the open infrastructure from the software agnostic to avoid any vendor lock-in. So that is where we foresee that open source can be a key driver to drive this market.
Okay, so you mean that you view open source as one of the possible ways for service providers and maybe also enterprises to avoid lock-in. But when you say lock-in, you refer to lock-in of hardware and software. You will refer to lock-in of software elements that are being brought together because that a lot of the elements are actually sub-licensed. So they're dictated for you. So are you relating to both of them, to only one of them? What's your point of view there?
I think in the beginning, this kind of event avoid vendor lock-in is for hardware only. However, I think, as I mentioned, that I think there are some pros and cons from the previous POC deployments. So I think people have learned that how they can get a benefit. And also they have learned how to adjust the solution or the service in terms of this kind of disaggregate model. So I think they have learned that how to control the disaggregate model from hardware. So that is why we think right now they are thinking to start to disaggregate from the software. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Joachim?
Yeah, so I'm going to divide this into two parts. First and foremost, the evolution of SD-WAN deployments is basically from what we've seen, and if we take it way back, maybe not to the 90s, but way nearer in the future. So SD-WAN is basically, the way I see it, is a product of the lack of optimization and customization provided by the carriers that exists on the market. So it was mainly developed to free up the resources that you have available within a carrier's network to an overlay network instead, and thereby configuring your own network. That's where it started out. And then you got adding a lot of firewall functionality and so forth in the mix to create this box. So it's deriving from there to where we are today, where SD-WAN is more or less considered something that needs to be in place for many of the customers, just for the flexibility that it offers, has been that moving from a niche product to a actual commodity product. So that's where SD-WAN, I think, is today. And if you look at open source SD-WAN, I think we will see a surge in that as soon as the community and the different vendors start to enter the scene. And I'm not saying that FlexiWAN hasn't entered the scene, but I think as soon as we see a market drive and a market push from the customer saying that, hey, we want this specific open source implementation, or we want this specific functionality, then we will see a market push towards that position.
Okay. Interesting. So maybe I'll extend that a bit. Do you see importance or the fact that you see a lot more and more capabilities being added into SD-WAN. Okay, so I mean, the best example for that is SASE, okay, which is like adding the security, providing it from the cloud and so forth. Do you see it as an advantage that all of these elements are being added together into a single solution, or would you prefer to see more of a, let's call it a UCPE type of approach that allows you to decide which VNFs you're putting inside? What's your thought here?
My thought is, and this is coming from a carrier perspective with 12 years of experience in deploying services for carriers, is that the more we move into a saturated market when it comes to these kind of deployments, the more the customers is going to want to pick and choose from a library full of applications that's suited for their needs rather than to be locked into a specific solution. And you mentioned UCP as something that's a viable solution, and that's where I think the open source solutions actually will fit the market the best, since UCP as a concept for me is more for the carrier, since it actually extends the delivery platform to not just have the underlay network, but to also have the applications as a pick and choose for the customer.
Okay.
So I'll verify that statement that you just said.
Okay. Thank you. Interesting, because today there is really I would say, let's call it tension between the two approaches of either putting more and more inside, and we see the Gartner push towards the SASE type of solution, versus some vendors that are providing software for managing and orchestrating the VNFs. And I think that can bring us also back to Sami because Advantech is a provider of hardware.
Yeah.
So what do you see as the role of the white box hardware and UCPE in the open source landscape? And you can also relate a bit further to the question that I asked before into the comments. So if you want, yeah, please.
Okay, I think for the white box and the UCP in the open source, I think with the introduction of open source SD-WAN recently, I think we have seen more inquiries from service provider, SI or enterprise that they want to build their own solution with for them to integrate the required connectivity or the power into the feature optimized UCP white box appliance with still the space to scale up higher performance for future demand. And also following this virtual infra mode, I think this solution can be extended from the cloud to network edge into the cluster, with also the means from the to join the solution. As we talk about, I think for the software-defined technology, this is not only just to disaggregate hardware. I think that is actually to avoid any vendor lock-in from the total solution point of view.
So I said before that we're seeing some kind of a tension, let's call it, between the closed solutions, or the solutions that kind of combine all the elements together inside them, versus UCP and the NFV concept. On the other hand, we don't see an incredible takeoff of the NFV. And I think that this can be related to at least two major reasons. One is that when you want to combine various elements of various vendors, you increase the complexity of the system, and you need something to orchestrate all of these VNFs together. And the second part of it is cost, that we're still seeing a challenge of cost reduction to be brought through NFV. I wonder if you have any point of view on that. It's not so much open source related, but I think it's somehow we can relate it to that. So if you want to comment something.
I think when it comes to cost, you always have considered your network costs and your IT costs as separate budgets. With SD-WAN, you have kind of moved those closer together. So the IT department is starting to realize that, hey, we can actually use this new platform that we have in place for other stuff than just networking. We can actually deploy cloud integrations and so forth inside of these boxes that we now have deployed. Moving ahead into the UCP space, now, and this is me perhaps dreaming of a future where, much like how your phone is provided with an app store, as soon as a box is placed at your home, whether it be a home or office, whether it be somewhat more expensive than the box you previously bought for your communication needs, it can actually supply you with actual business applications that you can use and save money on. And it can also, if you have a whole app marketplace like ecosystem behind it, you have developers around the globe developing more VNFs, more services, more NFVs, to be able to implement on those boxes that might be specifically for your needs and actually save you money in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So this is where my view of it, at least. Mm-hmm. I think we need to stop thinking about our communication as a separate item. We need to see it as the whole ecosystem of the business.
Okay, great. Actually, you know, I don't want to do here a product overview of what we do, but I can say, you mentioned the applications, and that's actually the vision that we came with. Because, and trying actually to bring, as you mentioned, the concept of a smartphone to networking. Because when you look at the NFV, one of the challenges there, when you run multiple VNFs, is that you're actually duplicating or having multiple instances of the operating system. So you actually have the full stack replicated again and again and again in order to run various functions. So in that space, what we are doing as the vision of FlexiWAN is that we are providing a framework for applications. So you can even be bare metal. You can run bare metal and still have various elements. Okay, so that's, you know, I don't want to talk further about that, but basically that's the concept in order to really try and reduce cost of the hardware as well, not only of the software. Okay, Sammy, so back to you about the anything else that you wanted to comment about UCP and the NFV, please.
Okay,
you have a very good market there as Advantech.
Thank you. I think for Advantech, as a hardware point of view, actually, I think we work with the kind of the, there's a business model we call this white box, and also the other one is for the gray box. That is, we offer the solution for the network equipment provider to sell us the total solution to their customer. And from our point of view, from our feedback based on all the customer, I think the people sometimes they like the gray box solution, because everything is already available by the provider, no matter the QA, the troubleshooting, or logistic, or even the service support. However, sometimes they feel that they don't have any flexibility. For example, if they want to add some features, they are really hard to convince the network equipment provider to enable this feature for them. And also, of course, the total expense is quite high from the hardware to software licensing. Maybe they charge per month or per year. So some customers, they really like the idea of the flexibility from the UCPE. However, I think there is another concern is that, as Amir, you just mentioned that for the UCPE, this kind of a solution, it is really complicated, especially for the newcomers. If they want to start to try the SD-WAN, because maybe they feel this is a hot topic from marketing, so they want to try. However, to start from the gray box, that is of course very expensive. But start from the UCP, it is also a bit complicated from the country or the demo license and also of course the solution integration. So I think that is why that we did see more inquiries to build their own open source. They want to use the open source to build up their solution to start the SD-WAN. So I think that That is from our perspective that there are people concerned about the total solution price instead of just the hardware.
Okay, I understand. So maybe Joachim, if you can tell us, do you see end user demand for open source, and what do you think will be the key reasons for this demand to grow in the future? What's your view on that?
So when it comes to the end users and the requirements we get from the customers today, they are pretty specifically tailored towards a vendor solution. So they're requesting one of the known brands, for example, on the market more and more. If we take a step back and remember what we just talked about with the UCP and applications and so forth, the SD-WAN open source is more fitted for that kind of purpose. So as soon as we see that the customers are not just requesting a single vendor, but multiple vendors, and they're also requesting different types of applications that they need to have running on the same box, and they might not be capable of running that alongside that vendor on their specifically locked-in solution. That's when I think that the open source solutions will start to shine because of their interoperability between different applications and different SD-WAN appliances or vendor solutions.
Okay. Thank you. And Sami, maybe if you want to touch that, but maybe also if you can add, what do you see as the key success factors for open source SD-WAN?
I think the key to success is the ecosystem, because I think for the end customer, I think they like the idea of the flexibility. However, they also want the solution to be trusted and also, of course, with a high reliability. So I think that is why we work closely with the innovative partner like SD-WAN to pre-validate all the platforms to minimize any risk for the valid deployment. So, and also I think another example of ecosystem collaboration is our joint open source test portal. I think with this portal, customers, they can remotely evaluate a wide range of platforms without concerning any hardware issue or the software demo licensing or solution setup. They can just remote access the platform to see no matter if they want to try the software performance or the hardware functionality. I think this portal have already been proven by very useful for very customer, especially during such critical time. So I think from our perspective is ecosystem partnership is really a key to drive the success in the market.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I think we talked a lot. Now I think it's time to move over to the audience and see if we have some questions here in the chat. So let's turn it over and see if there are questions we would like to answer. So this is the time for questions. Actually, we don't. You can enter questions both on the system, the swap card, I think it's called, or just here if you're watching this in the Q&A of Zoom, whatever you want. Okay, so let's give it a few more minutes. Meanwhile, Sami and Joachim, you can, by the way, your video is muted. If you want to mention anything else before, and meanwhile, let's give people the chance to enter some questions. Joachim, anything you want to mention further to what we said?
No, I'm good.
Anything about sessions you participated in?
Not really. No, that relates back to this, but I think we kind of hit the nail when we discussed it last time. I still strongly believe that an open source solution together with the UCP phenomenon is the way to go forward, and that's when the boom is bound to happen. So it will be really interesting to hear what the audience has in line.
Yeah. Sammy, I see you're reconnecting here. You can unmute yourself. You're muted now. Yeah. Anything you want to mention? We can't hear you. Sammy? Okay. Let's give it another try. She's reconnecting. Looks like some internet problems. Okay, just unmute now.
Yes, sorry, I'm back.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Anything you want to comment or add to further to the discussion? Or about some sessions that were on the conference so far?
No.
Okay.
I think
good. So
yes,
I don't actually see what?
No, please.
Okay. I'm saying I don't see any questions right now from the audience. So I think we can conclude for now. Just a few minutes earlier. I want to thank you very much for joining and answering all my questions. And sorry for bugging you a little bit, digging into some things. And thank you very much to the organizers here of this event. Not so easy to do it like this in remote, and hopefully we'll soon be back to real